65% of Americans believe intelligent life exists on other planets, according to Pew Research. But what happens when ordinary people, military pilots, and government officials across 3 states all witness the same unexplained phenomenon in our skies? Over 10,000 people witnessed the 1997 Phoenix Lights. The Air Force claimed they were flares from a training exercise, yet Governor Fife Symington, who initially mocked the sightings, later admitted he saw the massive V-shaped craft himself. Kurt Russell, piloting a plane that night, unknowingly reported the lights to air traffic control. These are respected individuals with reputations to protect who still can't explain what they saw. What does it mean when credible people witness something so inexplicable? The night Hollywood met UFOs, Kurt Russell's pilot report. On the evening of March 13, 1997, the skies over Phoenix were particularly clear. Air traffic was routine, with the typical flow of commercial flights making their final approaches into Sky Harbor International Airport. Among those aircraft was a private plane carrying Hollywood action star Kurt Russell and his son Oliver. Russell was at the controls that night, known for films like Escape from New York and The Thing. He was also a highly qualified pilot with thousands of hours of flight experience. His aviation background equipped him with expert knowledge of flight patterns, aircraft identification, and air traffic control protocols. As Russell's plane approached Phoenix from the west that evening, something unusual caught his attention through the cockpit window. In the distance, a formation of lights arranged in a distinctive V-shape moved steadily across the night sky. For a pilot with Russell's trained eye, identifying other aircraft in flight comes naturally, but these lights conformed to no conventional flight pattern he recognized. The formation maintained perfect spacing, appearing more like fixed points of light attached to a single massive object rather than separate aircraft flying in formation. More perplexing was the complete absence of the standard navigation lights required on all aircraft. No red and green wingtip lights, no white tail light, no strobes. Just steady amber-colored lights that moved in perfect unison. What Russell observed next further defied explanation. The object maintained a steady altitude and speed without the slight variations that normal aircraft experience due to atmospheric conditions. Even more striking was the absence of sound. An object of that apparent size should have created significant noise, especially at the relatively low altitude Russell estimated it to be flying. Following proper aviation protocol, Russell reported it to air traffic control. His voice calm and professional, Russell asked the controller if they were tracking any other traffic in the vicinity of his position. The controller responded that their radar showed nothing in that area apart from Russell's aircraft. Despite this, Russell persisted, describing the unusual formation he was observing. This exchange was recorded as part of the standard air traffic control communications, a seemingly routine pilot report that would later take on extraordinary significance. At the time, however, it was simply noted and filed away, with neither Russell nor the controller recognizing they were documenting what would become one of the most witnessed UFO events in American history. After landing safely with his son, Russell didn't make any public statements about what he'd seen. He filed no formal reports and sought no publicity. The incident became just another memory from his flying experience. Unlike many celebrity encounters with the unexplained, there was no press conference or attempt to capitalize on the sighting. Russell simply went about his life, unaware that thousands of people on the ground had witnessed the same phenomenon. The story might have remained a private experience were it not for a remarkable coincidence years later. While relaxing at home with his longtime partner, Goldie Hawn, Russell happened to be watching a television documentary about the Phoenix Lights incident. As the program mentioned an unidentified pilot who had radioed a sighting to air traffic control, Russell had a moment of stunning recognition. "I was watching the show with Goldie," Russell later recalled during an interview on BBC's The One Show in 2017. "And I said, wait a minute, that was me. That was me." The documentary had unwittingly featured Russell's own report, though the identity of the pilot had remained unknown to the producers. "It was this electric moment," he added, "realizing I'd been part of something so much bigger than I ever knew." The weight of that realization, that his routine call had been a piece of a historical puzzle, visibly affected him even years later during interviews. This prompted Russell to search through his flight logbooks, where he confirmed that he had indeed been flying with his son in the Phoenix area on the exact date of the incident. The timing, location, and details all matched perfectly with his memory of reporting the strange lights. What makes Russell's testimony particularly compelling is that he didn't come forward initially. Unlike witnesses seeking attention, Russell had no agenda in reporting what he saw. He was simply doing his duty as a pilot by alerting air traffic control to an unusual aerial object. This inadvertent involvement gives his account a unique credibility. Furthermore, Russell's aviation background allowed him to distinguish between normal aircraft operations and truly anomalous phenomena. He wasn't an excitable novice mistaking conventional aircraft lights for something exotic. He was a seasoned pilot with the technical knowledge to recognize when something defied standard aeronautical explanations. The timing of Russell's report adds another dimension of significance. His radio communication occurred in real time as the event was unfolding, before it had been labeled a mass sighting or given media attention. This contemporaneous documentation eliminates the possibility of his memory being influenced by subsequent reports or coverage. While ground witnesses observed the formation from below, Russell encountered it from altitude, where the size, movement patterns, and unusual characteristics of the lights would have been even more apparent. His pilot's intuition, what aviators sometimes call their aerial sixth sense, told him something truly remarkable was in the sky. The fact that air traffic control radar reportedly detected nothing unusual during this time, despite visual confirmation from both air and ground, adds another layer of mystery to the incident. Either the radar systems were incapable of detecting the object, or the records of what was detected have never been publicly acknowledged. As the Phoenix Lights phenomenon grew into a national news story, with thousands of reports flooding in from across Arizona and neighboring states, Russell remained unaware that his private aerial encounter was connected to a much larger event. He had been an unwitting witness to what would become one of the most significant mass UFO sightings in American history. Mass witness event, 10,000 plus people across 3 states. Russell's experience was merely the tip of an extraordinary iceberg. As his private aircraft descended toward Phoenix that evening, a remarkable phenomenon was unfolding across the southwestern United States. The V-shaped formation that captured the Hollywood star's attention was simultaneously being observed by thousands of witnesses spanning Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Mexico, creating one of the most statistically significant mass sighting events in UFO history. The progression of sightings on March 13th followed a clear geographic path. Henderson, Nevada, 7:55 p.m. Right pointing arrow Kingman, Paulden, Arizona, 8:15 p.m. Right pointing arrow Prescott, 8:25 p.m. Right pointing arrow Phoenix metro area, 8:30 to 8:45 p.m. Right pointing arrow Tucson, 8:50 p.m. Right pointing arrow Mexico. Like a methodical storm system tracking predictably across the landscape, the formation moved approximately 300 miles over 2 hours along a consistent southeasterly course. Tim Lay and his family provided one of the most compelling ground observations from Phoenix. They tracked the object's approach for 10 to 15 minutes in their yard. It was astronomical in size, Lay reported. As it got closer, we could see it was a solid object, an equilateral triangle with lights embedded along the bottom. It moved at about 30 to 40 miles per hour and passed directly overhead at an altitude of roughly 1,000 feet, but in complete silence. This consistency across independent witness descriptions challenged statistical probability. Susan Watson, a former air traffic controller in Scottsdale, emphasized this. When you have thousands of people describing the same specific details, the craft's shape, its behavior, the lighting configuration, without having communicated with each other, you're looking at something that can't be explained away as coincidence or confusion. Law enforcement became documentation centers as their switchboards lit up region-wide. The Phoenix Police Department received over 200 calls within 30 minutes. Sergeant Robert Deo stated, "In my 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything like it." The volume of calls was unprecedented, and what struck me was how similar the descriptions were. These weren't people reporting ambiguous lights. They were describing specific characteristics with remarkable consistency. The witness demographics strengthened the case's credibility. Commercial pilots, military veterans, police officers, doctors, and engineers came forward with detailed accounts. Richard Contino, a Vietnam War veteran and former Air Force pilot, observed from Tempe, "I've flown everything from F-4 Phantoms to commercial 737s. What passed over my house was no conventional aircraft. The formation was too rigid, the lights too steady, and most importantly, there was absolutely no sound despite being at an altitude where engine noise would have been unmistakable." The descriptions contradicted known aircraft capabilities in 2 crucial aspects, sound and size. Mark Rudeffer, an aeronautical engineer in Mesa, noted, any aircraft large enough to account for what people saw, especially at 1,000 to 2,000 feet, would have created significant noise. The laws of physics simply don't allow for silent propulsion at that scale with our current technology. Size estimates from hundreds of witnesses, including aviation professionals, consistently describe the formation between 600 feet and 1 mile wide. For context, the world's largest conventional aircraft, the Antonov An-225, has a wingspan of just 290 feet. Using the held at arm's length measuring technique, witnesses reported the object appeared larger than a closed fist, indicating an enormous physical presence. The documented movement pattern further contradicted conventional explanations. The object maintained steady course and speed without typical deviations or altitude adjustments that aircraft make in response to atmospheric conditions. Despite light variable winds across the region at night, the object showed no signs of being affected as balloons, flares, or other phenomena would have been. Witnesses consistently described seeing a solid structure connecting the lights. Bonnie Lewis, an elementary school teacher in Chandler, watched it pass overhead. The stars were blacked out in the shape of a V as it moved. You could clearly see it was one solid object because it blocked out the stars behind it. This wasn't separate lights. It was a massive, solid thing. Media outlets were equally overwhelmed. Frances Emma Barwood, a Phoenix City Councilwoman, stated that KPNX Channel 12 received over 300 calls that evening. The television stations were flooded with calls, but initially hesitant to report on the phenomenon. When they finally aired segments in the following days, it triggered even more witnesses to come forward. Luke Air Force Base reported unusual call volume, with dozens of citizens inquiring whether military exercises explained what they saw. The base initially responded that no unusual aircraft were operating in the area, a statement that would later conflict with the military's flare explanation. The phenomenon's consistency across a vast area created an evidentiary pattern similar to how geologists might track a single earthquake through seismograph readings at different stations. The data points aligned too perfectly to be coincidental. Dr. Lynn Ketai, a physician who documented the lights and later authored a book on the phenomenon, addressed this. Mass hallucination requires a triggering event and suggestion. There was no unified trigger here. People were in their cars, yards, homes, scattered across hundreds of miles, many in isolation from media or others. Mass hallucination simply cannot account for the consistent reports across such distances. The sheer volume of testimony forced media attention in the days following. Local news outlets initially approached the story with typical UFO stigma, but the credibility of witnesses quickly transformed it into legitimate news. By March 15th, the story reached national outlets, with USA Today running the headline, "Skies Buzzed by Mystery Objects in Southwest." The Governor's Secret, Fife Symington's public mockery versus private truth. The media attention surrounding the Phoenix lights created an unprecedented situation for Arizona's highest office. As thousands of witnesses demanded answers, Governor Fife Symington found himself at a pivotal crossroads that would lead to one of the most bizarre chapters in political history. On June 19, 1997, more than 3 months after the sightings, Governor Symington called a highly anticipated press conference at the state capitol. Citizens and journalists packed the room, expecting the governor to address the mounting questions about what had traversed Arizona's skies. Symington had promised clarity on an event that had captivated his state and the entire nation. "We're going to get to the bottom of this," Symington announced as cameras rolled. "This is an issue that has garnered serious attention and deserves a serious response." The room fell silent as the governor stepped away from the podium, building anticipation for what many hoped would be an acknowledgement of the thousands of witness reports. What happened next shocked everyone present. The lights dimmed, and when they came back up, Symington's chief of staff appeared wearing a crude alien costume with an oversized silver head. The governor's solemn expression broke into a grin as he announced, "This is the culprit." Case closed. The press conference immediately transformed from a serious inquiry into mockery, with Arizona's highest elected official ridiculing his own constituents' experiences. Meanwhile, across town, former police officer Mark Greenberg, who had witnessed the lights, remained confident in what he'd seen. "I've observed aircraft for 20 years. This was something entirely different. Massive, silent, and impossible to explain away." The backlash was immediate. Phoenix City Councilwoman Frances Emma Barwood, who had formally requested an investigation into the sightings, publicly condemned the governor's actions. People were devastated, Barr would later recall. These were police officers, pilots, everyday citizens who witnessed something extraordinary, only to be treated like fools by their own governor. Local newspapers received an influx of angry letters. One Phoenix resident wrote to the Arizona Republic, "I voted for Governor Symington, but his mockery of thousands of sincere reports shows a profound disrespect for the citizens he serves. I know what I witnessed wasn't a joke." Symington's theatrical dismissal reflected complex political calculation. As a Republican governor in a conservative state with significant military presence, including Luke Air Force Base, Symington faced substantial pressures. The 1990s political climate treated UFO reports with derision, acknowledging such phenomena risk being labeled fringe or unstable. Michael Christoffy, who served on Symington's staff, later suggested the governor was walking a tightrope. There were serious concerns about economic impacts, Christoffy explained. Arizona was aggressively courting aerospace contracts and technology companies. The governor worried that if Phoenix became known as the UFO capital, it could undermine those efforts. The Mockery effectively ended mainstream media coverage of the incident. Local news stations shifted to covering the governor's stunt instead of the underlying phenomenon. Within weeks, the story had largely disappeared from headlines, despite the unanswered questions. For the next decade, Symington maintained his dismissive stance. When questioned about the Phoenix Lights in subsequent years, he would reference the press conference with a knowing smile, reinforcing the narrative that the incident was worthy only of ridicule. This public position effectively silenced many witnesses who feared similar mockery if they continued pressing their accounts. The political risks of acknowledging a UFO sighting while in public office were substantial. James Albright, political analyst and author of Public Service and Public Secrets, notes that elected officials who express belief in unexplained phenomena typically face immediate credibility challenges. The political playbook is clear, Albright wrote. Officials who acknowledge UFOs risk their career trajectory, party support, and public image. The safer path is always denial or deflection. This political calculation became even more complicated when, in September 1997, just months after the Phoenix Lights incident, Symington was convicted on bank fraud charges unrelated to his handling of the sightings. With his political credibility already damaged, any admission about witnessing unexplained phenomena would have further undermined his standing during his legal battles. The years passed, and the Phoenix Lights gradually transformed from breaking news to historical curiosity. Symington left office in disgrace following his conviction, though it was later overturned on appeal. Free from the constraints of public office, the former governor's perspective began to shift. Then, in 2007, came the revelation that stunned both believers and skeptics. A decade after mocking the Phoenix Lights with his alien costume press conference, Fife Symington publicly reversed his position in dramatic fashion. Speaking at a press conference organized by former NASA astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Symington made an extraordinary admission. "I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies," Symington stated. It was dramatic. It had a geometric outline, a constant motion, and an overall solid formation. It was enormous and inexplicable. Who knows where it came from? A lot of people saw it, and I saw it too. Most shocking was Symington's admission about why he staged the notorious alien press conference. "I was governor. I had to be careful to maintain a proper skeptical spin because I didn't want to create panic in the entire state. But what I saw was something that defied logic and challenged my reality." Richard Mozer, who had been a senior policy advisor to Symington in 1997, confirmed that the governor had privately discussed seeing the lights immediately after the incident. "He told a few of us that he had witnessed it himself while driving that evening," Mozer revealed in a 2010 interview. But he was explicit that this conversation never happened. The political risks were too great. The revelation transformed the understanding of the incident. Here was the very official who had most publicly ridiculed the sightings now confirming not only their reality but adding his own high-credibility witness testimony. As a former Air Force pilot with extensive flight experience, Symington's belated account carried particular weight. Leslie Keene, investigative journalist who interviewed Symington for her book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, noted the significance. Symington's reversal demonstrates the extraordinary pressure on officials to conform to expected narratives about unexplained phenomena, even when their personal experiences directly contradict those narratives. Two events. One night, the critical timeline discrepancy. The revelation of Symington's private truth shattered more than political expectations. It exposed a crucial misunderstanding about what actually happened on March 13, 1997. Most people don't realize that what we collectively call the Phoenix Lights was actually two separate events occurring nearly 2 hours apart, a distinction that fundamentally changes the entire conversation about what thousands witnessed. This timeline discrepancy is the key to understanding why the military explanation and witness testimonies seem irreconcilable. They're describing two completely different phenomena. The first event began around 8:15 p.m. as a massive V-shaped formation methodically traversed Arizona airspace on a southeast trajectory. This was the primary object witnessed by thousands across the state, including Governor Symington and Kurt Russell. Observers consistently reported a solid, structured craft with lights arranged in a distinct V pattern moving at a deliberate pace across the state. Mike Fortson, a Phoenix resident who witnessed both events, emphasized this distinction. What most people don't understand is that there were two completely different sets of lights that night. The V-shaped craft came through first, around 8:30. The stationary lights that the military claimed were flares didn't appear until around 10 p.m. In contrast, the second event, beginning around 10 p.m., involved a series of stationary lights hovering over the Phoenix Mountains. These lights appeared suddenly, remained visible for several minutes, and gradually faded from view. This later display was captured in most of the video footage that made it to national television, creating lasting confusion about what witnesses had actually reported earlier in the evening. Dr. Lynn Ketai, who documented both phenomena, noted the stark differences. The V-shaped phenomenon was a singular solid structure moving silently across the valley. The later lights were individual orbs that remained stationary and eventually descended behind the mountains. Entirely different in formation, behavior, and duration. This distinction becomes critically important when examining the military's explanation.